Welcome to the recorded version of Living and Dying with Dementia, Taking Charge of Your Personal Values, from April 21st, 2020. Sponsored by Compassionate Choices, a highlighted session of virtual AIA 20.
Okay, we have four presenters here with us this morning. George Vredenberg is a chairman of Us Against Alzheimer's, which he co-founded in October 2010. He was named by U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius to serve on the Advisory Council on Research, Care, and Services established by the National Alzheimer's Project Act, and has testified before Congress about the global Alzheimer's pandemic. Kim Callinan is president and CEO of Compassionate Choices. She has played a leadership role in authorizing and implementing medical aid in dying into 5 jurisdictions, drafting and implementing Compassionate Choices' strategic plan, and frequently speaking at conferences, testifying before state legislatures, conducting policy briefings, and serving on committees as a subject matter expert on end-of-life care options. As Chief Marketing and Program Officer for Compassionate Choices, Tom Quash is responsible for the organization's marketing, communications, and digital activities, end-of-life care resources, and programs and the initiatives designed to engage underrepresented communities. Tom has held several marketing and leadership roles with a number of nonprofit and for-profits, including the Association for Women's Health, Obstetric and Neonatal Nurses, the American Society of Association Executives, and Simon & Schuster. A former member of the American Civil Liberties Union Board of Directors, Dan Winter is the father of 3 grown children, and at age 59 was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. Dan moved to Oregon from Missouri in 2011, partly inspired by the state's Death with Dignity Act, and remains an active advocate for end-of-life care planning. I'd like to welcome our 4 presenters here this morning. And we're going to start off, our first presenter here is George Vredenberg. Welcome, George.
Thank you very, very much for having me. And Us Against Alzheimer's is an organization founded by 3 families in 2010, each of whom had been deeply affected by Alzheimer's. In my case, it was 3 generations, a grandmother, a mother, and now a brother-in-law. So, in fact, I am not unique. What I found, strikingly, as I looked into it, is how many people around the world are experiencing this in their families. And so, why is that the case? Next slide, please. The life expectancy at birth around the world has for almost 1,000 years been in the 30s. And what we saw with the 20th century and now 21st century is that, in fact, we are experiencing a demographic change of really unique historical characteristics. This has been the first time in history that life expectancy has been this long, and we're beginning to see chronic diseases that are associated with aging come to the fore, and now more people die of chronic diseases, non-communicable chronic diseases of aging, than they die of infectious diseases. Next slide. As you see on this particular slide, the sort of diagonal red line up is the prevalence of Alzheimer's over the next 30 years, almost predictable to a T because of the aging demographic and the fact that aging is the primary risk for Alzheimer's. So by mid-century, it is expected that 150 million families. Now I'm saying families because this is a disease, and not just of the individual with Alzheimer's, but also of the entire family, the caregivers, the financial support, the emotional support, everyone in the family is implicated. So 150 million families is perhaps close to 500 million people. The blue stacks, as you go up this, is the annualized cost to the world, to the world's health systems, and to out-of-pocket costs of this disease, and it's rising from something approximating $1.5 trillion this year to $3 trillion by mid-century. So the question for us, not flattening the curve, but how do you alter the trajectory of that number? And there are 2 basic strategies that are being employed and now offering us a degree of hope. Next slide. The increasing evidence around prevention and risk reduction. Research has demonstrated that, in fact, older generations had Alzheimer's at higher rates at the same age than younger generations. And so epidemiologists looked at why was that the case? Why were sort of younger cohorts getting the disease at lesser degrees of age-related incidence than older populations? And the answer was there are a number of factors that are identified here on the left as a part of research. Low education, midlife hearing loss, obesity, late life depression, smoking, physical inactivity, hypertension, diabetes, social isolation. Well, those particular factors, those risk factors that are seeming to cause dementia, or put another way, if adequately addressed, can reduce the rate of increase in the growth of prevalence of Alzheimer's, are addressable. If one has both us as patients, all of us, living a life that in fact attends and looks at and focuses on those 9 factors, and if we can get society more generally to take on board the risk reduction strategies. And of course the health system, which has to basically confirm to individuals at every health visit these particular lifestyle changes. And you'll see some of them, like hypertension, which is heart cardiovascular risk, and diabetes. Those particular conditions can themselves be modified by lifestyle or by medication. So it's a combination of lifestyle changes and comorbidity management. And we are now socializing the idea of setting a national goal of reducing the prevalence of Alzheimer's by 30% by 2030. Setting that goal, we believe, and embracing that goal by governments, by business, by the healthcare industry, we believe, and ultimately by populations, we believe can in fact lower the rate of that red line growth in the previous slide. We're also looking at adding to that goal a reduction in prevalence by 2030 of 40% in communities of color and in low-income populations, because the incidence of Alzheimer's at any age is 2 to 3 times for whites, for blacks as it is for whites, 1.5 times for Latinos, and in low-income populations, twice the rate. That suggests that, in fact, the challenge here is to try and mitigate the social and health disparities among our population as we take on a prevention goal and a risk reduction strategies. The second strategy, next slide, is in fact drug development. In 2012, with the National Alzheimer's Project Act, which demanded that the United States government develop a strategy, the strategy was developed to bring on board a disease-modifying or disease-altering drug by 2025. And that particular strategy has caused Congress to allocate additional monies to NIH to do that, and in fact, industry being tracked to do that. So we're going to see the first disease-modifying therapy put to the FDA for potential approval any time in the next few days. And if in fact that drug is approved, we'll have a disease-modifying drug on market by early next year. Not to say there aren't hurdles for people getting on that drug, but nevertheless, some real promise on the therapeutic front, in addition to the prevention and risk reduction front. There are already is one drug approved this year for the use of Balsamra, a Merck drug for sleep disorders in Alzheimer's victims, a drug that has been used successfully with Parkinson's victims, and now we have this symptomatic drug for sleep disorders in individuals with Alzheimer's. And the other drug about to be filed is for agitation. This is a symptom of many, up to a third of Alzheimer's victims, and is one of the chief reasons that people go into nursing homes or to assisted living centers. So those two symptomatic drugs are likely to be approved this year. They've been used in other indications, and in fact now will be used for Alzheimer's indications. And with a disease-modifying drug, we're basically beginning a cycle of innovation in this space that we have been struggling for 15 to 20 years to get to. So that will just be the opening gun, as we know with HIV and any number of cancer treatments. The first treatment is going to be less than totally effective. But what you do is you start investment in the space by other companies, and you begin to develop a chain of innovation as increasing drugs come on market, because the disease-modifying drug that may come out of Biogen and get approved this year is going to be followed by a subsequent drug now in trials from ASI, which purports to be of higher performance. And other drugs are now beginning to come into the chain, and up to 100 drugs now in somewhere in the clinical trial system, but there are drugs now coming out of that clinical trial system which seem to be successful. Next slide. We're obviously in the middle of a pandemic with COVID, and what we're learning out of that is the importance that dealing with something as large as an infectious pandemic, or in our case, a non-infectious pandemic that is slow boil, is you need a broad public health support effort across government and industry in order to address it and to be prepared for it. You need early and accessible tests for the existence of the condition, so that you can intervene early in the course of a condition, whether it be COVID or whether it be Alzheimer's, but intervene early in that disease process and have a much more successful likelihood of success in delaying the progression of the disease or mitigating its symptoms. We're going to need, just like in COVID, as we're learning, a good deal of attention to health provider capacity and training in what will be a new area for the health system. That is, some treatments that may be effective for drugs, or some prevention and risk reduction strategies for dementia. And obviously, we have the same urgency in our space as we do currently with COVID to increase research and innovations in vaccines and treatments, and we're beginning to get at least a hint that we're able to do that. And then finally, just making sure that we know who is at risk for this disease, because if it's possible to give someone either a vaccine or to have them change their lifestyle and manage risk factors before symptoms hit, that's the home run. That in fact we can get the lifestyle changes and or drugs into people before symptoms occur, so that you can be sort of biologically positive for the disease, but nevertheless never get the symptoms. That's a home run. Prevention, that in fact you change your lifestyle and you manage your other risk factors and you never get the symptoms. So we have been polling, next slide, for COVID now and the impact on our community. And the impact on the dementia community of COVID is significant. It is causing daycare centers for older adults with dementia to be closed. It's causing home health care providers to either be terminated or let go or stay away from their patients. We're seeing, obviously, super spreaders inside assisted living centers and inside nursing homes. So our community is being deeply impacted by COVID. We are active in this space simply because our community is so badly and significantly impacted. And so I want to simply say how significant a problem this is, how great the opportunity is to present here, and thank Kim Callinan for allowing me to do this. And Kim and I work hand in glove. I am sort of on the living with dementia side, and Kim has been so effective around the country in getting death with dignity laws adopted, which allows someone with a terminal disease able to administer a medicine to themselves to take advantage of that opportunity. But it doesn't not work with dementia. Kim has developed a set of tools to allow yourself to now express your own preferences and your own desires, so that those who have your healthcare proxy, hopefully, a durable healthcare proxy, will know precisely what you would like to have done at any particular stage, even if you are in a late stage or moderate stage of dementia and cannot yourselves be able to administer a medicine, and doctors are not able to say with certainty that you're going to die within a certain period of time. So I thank Kim for her work, and I'm a supporter of her organization and admirer of Kim personally. And so I think she is next up.
So much, George, for your words and your advocacy, because there is nothing that we would want more than to find a cure for dementia. It really is a devastating disease. Just a bit about Compassion and Choices for those who don't know. We are a national nonprofit organization that's mission is about helping people to chart their end-of-life journey. And we work primarily, we're supported by individuals, similar to what George talked about with Us Against Alzheimer's. It's individuals who have unfortunately experienced the travesty of our end-of-life care system and what's not working, who have supported us so that we can help to realize greater autonomy, dignity, compassion, better laws and systems at the end of life. And we do this in a host of ways. Today, we're going to focus primarily on talking about how one can realize a compassionate end with dementia. As George mentioned, I am the president and CEO of Compassion and Choices. And when we first envisioned this webinar, it was long before COVID-19 was a reality. Since that time, obviously, there's a lot out there about some of the struggles that people that are within nursing homes are facing at the end who have dementia, or even just who don't have dementia, with coronavirus running rampant and families not being able to visit. This is a photo that was in the news of a family sitting outside of a nursing home attempting to communicate with their loved one. And this is really just such an unfortunate situation that we're in. It's really outside the scope of what we had envisioned this webinar to discuss. So I wanted to just take a moment to recognize the work of Consumer Voice and let people know about their toolkit that they put together that's really about caring for somebody in a long-term care facility. So if that is the situation that you're in and you're wondering, how can I help ensure that I protect and safeguard the future of somebody who's in a long-term care facility, I encourage you to go to the Consumer Voice toolkit, because they have some really good resources put together. I also want to take a moment to just acknowledge all of the frontline workers who are working on the pandemic, the American Society of Aging for putting together this webinar, and to George and his team for all their work that they're doing to help us find a cure for dementia. For me, this desire to find a cure for dementia is a very personal one. It started more than 25 years ago when my grandmother was first diagnosed with dementia. And the picture that's here is at my wedding. It was, she had already had dementia at this point for 3 years, and we had many wonderful moments together after her dementia diagnosis. So I do want to be sure that people realize that after a dementia diagnosis, there still can be many, many wonderful years together. This was one of the last times that she recognized and remembered me, and it is a time that I will cherish forever. Unfortunately, those times did eventually fade away, and my grandmother was somebody who always loved children. For years, she begged me for great-grandchildren. And in 2000, I fulfilled that wish with the birth of my son, Trey. By this time, unfortunately, my grandmother's dementia was very advanced, and while I had watched her decline for years, I very secretly and naively hoped that when she saw her grandson, she somehow was going to snap out of her trance. And of course, you know that the story does not have a happy ending because I placed Trey in her eyes and there was no recognition of him, of me, of my mother, of her husband of more than 60 years. And she continued not to recognize herself. And it was in that moment when I started to consider quality of life and the certainty of death. My grandmother remained in this state, which was like a trance, for several more years. And throughout that experience, we showed our love for her by doing exactly what most people do. We treated her pneumonia, we took care of her infections, and we extended her life as long as possible. What we didn't recognize at that time was that we weren't just extending her life, we were also delaying her death, and we were prolonging her suffering. And we never contemplated whether or not she would have wanted to live this way. Because the cultural norm in the United States is that caring for someone means treating them, keeping them alive as long as possible, even if it's against what they want and they have been robbed of their personhood. Our experience caring for a loved one with dementia is not uncommon. In fact, many people show their love in a way that's even more significant than what we did. There was an article that I read several months ago, an op-ed that was written in the Washington Post by Dr. Jeffrey Hosta. He was an emergency room physician who is board certified and has been practicing for more than 30 years. And as you can see, the title of the article is "Doctors Are Torturing Dementia Patients at the End of Their Life," and it's totally unnecessary. Dr. Hosta proceeded in the op-ed to share how he, in his own words, tortured an 88-year-old woman with advanced dementia. When she had come into the emergency room, her mind was gone. She didn't know her own name. And like other patients with advanced dementia, she was agitated, aggressive, immobile. Her quality of life was really dismal. And the move to the hospital had created even more agitation, uncertainty, and discomfort. When she arrived in the emergency rooms, her loved ones asked him to do everything possible to keep her alive. So they did that. They did exactly what they were instructed to do. They gave her IV antibiotics, an uncomfortable urinary catheter, CPR, which broke her ribs, and they put the 12-inch feeding tube down her throat to hook her up to a ventilator, and she was put on life support. She went through all that torture, which is the word he uses, not I, and she died a day later. Unfortunately, that experience is not all that uncommon here in the United States. 2 out of 5 people with advanced dementia receive some form of invasive medical procedure in the last 3 months of their life. 1 out of every 2 nursing home residents with advanced dementia have at least 1 hospital visit. And if you look now at the situation we're in, generally speaking, our healthcare system operates under the assumption that the goal of care for a patient with advanced dementia continues to be the extension of life. And I want to be really clear that for some people that may be what they want. But for most people, we know that that's not actually the case. That's what our survey data shows us. The treatments can actually cure advanced dementia. They're not going to improve a person's quality of life. And they may be painful and disoriented and increase suffering. We're in an unfortunate situation now with the pandemic where healthcare resources there's a shortage of healthcare resources. And now the pendulum has swung in the other direction, at least when it comes to ventilators. And this is equally concerning because it should never be a third party that is making decisions about the kind of end-of-life care options people get. Only the patient should be in the position where they're doing that. They should be the driver in their end-of-life care decisions. And in this case, it's assumptions and scarcity, not information and empowerment, that are guiding medical care that is being delivered to patients. And that's not something that should be happening in a country as rich as ours. The COVID-19 pandemic underscores the importance of end-of-life care planning. It tells us why it's so important that we take time to fully understand the risks and benefits of various different treatment options that are available to us. And I encourage you, if you know somebody or have a loved one that you're the healthcare proxy for who's in a nursing home, to go onto the Compassion and Choices website and to use our COVID-19 toolkit. And this is something that you should be using for yourself, for your loved ones. Everybody should be filling this out, but especially if you've got a loved one who's in a nursing home, who has dementia, early stages, and they're able to plan what they want, or even if they're not in a position where they're able to make decisions for themselves, if you're going to have to make these decisions for them later in life, it's really critical that you take the time to plan and prepare for what it is that you would want. It's answering questions like, would your loved one prefer to die in the surroundings of their nursing home, or should they get COVID-19 and have difficulty breathing, would they rather be rushed to the emergency room and put on a ventilator? And those are decisions that you may have to face at some point, but facing those decisions in advance when you have time to really contemplate what they want and understand the risks and benefits of the various different treatment options is far preferable to waiting until the moment that the crisis ensues when you don't have the ability to make a fully informed decision. So I encourage you to do this for yourselves and for your loved ones right now in the midst of this pandemic. But in addition to that, as George mentioned, there are longer-term considerations for you to take when it comes to dementia. What we have done is we know from survey data that the majority of Americans, death is preferable to a life with advanced dementia. Yet generally speaking, within our medical system, the goal of care for somebody with advanced dementia continues to be the extension of life, often for years beyond the point at which they could achieve a natural death. Fewer than half of nursing home residents right now have do not resuscitate orders in place, and fewer than 2% have a do not hospitalize order in place. Right now, there is a gap, which I really consider to be a chasm between what we want for ourselves and how we are caring for our loved ones. Most people from our data show that what they want for themselves if they end up in a state of advanced dementia is to allow for the natural death to take place. Yet, like with my grandmother, what we continue to do is treat. We continue to assume that the goal of care is the extension of life. However, there are other legal options that are available to people right now. Right now, every mentally capable adult has the right to pre-claim their voice, document their desire to refuse treatments, and allow for a natural death should advanced dementia take hold. For decades, pneumonia was referred to as the old man's friend because without life-saving antibiotics, it can be a very comfortable and peaceful death. And there are a host of other diseases that people typically get that we choose to treat, whether it be diabetes or heart disease, that could also serve as a way to allow a natural death to take place. So if it is the person's option, with simple planning, one can reduce years of suffering with advanced dementia by documenting your preferences. Yet very few people are aware they have this option, and even fewer are taking the necessary steps. Right now, 1 in 3 older adults will die with dementia. Roughly 6 million people currently live with dementia right here in the United States. And as George mentioned, these numbers are growing. By 2050, the number is projected to grow to a staggering 14 million people. Most of us will have our own personal experience with dementia, either as the afflicted, as the caregiver, or sometimes both. It has been 25 years since my grandmother was first diagnosed with dementia. And since that time, the prevalence of dementia has grown exponentially, as George showed us. Yet the vast majority of Americans remain just as unprepared to navigate care options for their loved ones as we were for my grandmother. As a result, the chasm between our values and priorities and the default mode in medicine has not just persisted, but it is now seismic. But together, we can close the gap by contemplating, documenting, and vocalizing our preferences and priorities for care now in advance of the onset of a dementia diagnosis. It won't change the likelihood that dementia impacts your life, but it will reduce needless suffering and take the guilt and guesswork out of caregiving. I'm now going to turn it over to Tom Quash, who is the Chief Marketing and Program Officer at Compassion and Choices. And Tom's going to talk to you a little bit about the specific tools that we have that will allow you to make the option, should you choose, to either extend your life, if that's the option that you want, or to realize a faster death if you end up in a place of dementia. Tom?
Thank you, Kim. As Kim noted, we do have resources that we were developed that are designed for the public to document their own wishes in the face of a dementia diagnosis. But we needed to substantiate the general population's support for such a resource. Compassion and Choices worked with the Harris Poll to disseminate a survey to gauge public interest. We presented the following proposal that you see on screen there for consideration to survey respondents with regard to dementia and healthcare. This proposal reads in part, every adult should be permitted to document in advance their wishes during the late stages of dementia. The survey was conducted online within the United States by the Harris Poll on behalf of Compassion and Choices from December 17th through the 19th, 2018, among just over 2,000 adults ages 18 and older. The results were weighted for age within gender, region, race and ethnicity, income, and education to align them with their actual proportions in the population. The propensity score weighting was also used to adjust for the respondents' propensity to be online. As Kim noted, a majority of Americans at 72% support this proposal, with 43% strongly supporting it. Support is especially strong among older adults ages 65 and older at 81%, married adults at 76%, and those with a college degree at 79%. Now that we have the data to reinforce our commitment to helping people document their values and priorities while they are mentally capable to do so, their loved ones can now navigate treatment and avoid prolonged suffering. Excuse me. We designed 2 interactive web-based tools that will help people take control of their care following a dementia diagnosis, the Dementia Decoder and the Dementia Values and Priorities tool. The Dementia Decoder allows users, either patients or their caregivers, to select the status of the dementia diagnosis and indicate what they're hoping to learn and accomplish from a clinical appointment, and to customize the experience from a list of helpful questions. Excuse me. By selecting questions for their physician in advance, this helps inform the decision-making process around treatment. The questions can then be either printed or emailed directly and sent to the healthcare provider or the family member. And with a dementia diagnosis, every journey is different. You may want all available treatments to keep you alive, even if you have advanced dementia, or you might want to forego medical interventions that are artificially prolonging your life so you can be allowed to die naturally if you are in a state of advanced dementia. This is your choice. The Dementia and Values Priorities tool will help you consider and identify your personal values and care wishes so that you can create a strategy to stay in control of your care. You will be able to provide clear care instructions for your loved ones, outlining your own intentions for your personalized care plan. Your advanced planning takes the burden off of your loved ones to make difficult decisions for you when you can no longer make those decisions for yourself. The Values and Priorities tool includes a set of 17 markers that are critical to you, such as no longer recognizing loved ones, becoming angry or violent, or spending days confined to your bed. After answering a series of questions and adding your own personalized markers, you will have the opportunity to print, download, or email a customized customized amendment to your Healthcare Advance Directive specific to a dementia diagnosis. You can access both the dementia tools, the Dementia Decoder and the Dementia Values and Priorities tool at the Compassion and Choices website on our homepage at compassionandchoices.org, and then select Plan Your Care from the top menu. I'd now like to turn it over to one of our most inspirational and compassionate supporters, Dan Winter, to tell his personalized story.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that approach, and Kim, you really set me up for this presentation by talking about the product, the Dementia Toolkit. You know, my story that I'm going to tell is really far from unique. As Kim so eloquently displayed just now, everyone here knows about Alzheimer's and other dementia-related diseases. Most of us here, I'd bet, have had to confront this unforgiving and relentless disease. Many of us have someone we love go through it. I certainly did. In 2000, at age 70, my dad was diagnosed with, excuse me, I'm trying to manage this slides. My dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and he died 13 years later. By the way, he doesn't have a bit of Scottish blood in him. He just liked wearing kilts. And so at age 70, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and he died 13 years later. And I want to tell you a little bit about my father. This guy played his final game of rugby in New Zealand at age 65. He was a serial entrepreneur. He always had a keen sense of what his next move should be, and he was always on the move. He served 3 terms in the Kansas State Senate in the 70s and the 80s. He was known for this piece of legislation, right turn on red. And we joked that he introduced that. He was the first state lawmaker in the country to introduce a bill to allow all of us to turn right on a red light. But we joked he just introduced that legislation so he could get places faster himself. He was also simultaneously a cattle rancher, an attorney, a restaurateur, a banker, and he traveled a whole lot. I'm the middle of my dad's 5 children. Because he was on the road a lot, we didn't see him much more than a couple days a week. To make up for that absence, he would sometimes show up at our schoolroom door and yank one or more of us from our classrooms. Before we knew it, we'd be passengers in his light plane on our way to Butte, Montana, or Mobile, Alabama, or Santa Fe, or Saskatoon. It was really a blast. The last day I saw my father was several months before he died. We sat silently next to each other at his home, which was a memory care unit in Lawrence, Kansas. He couldn't speak, nor meet my eye, nor respond to me with even the simplest words. It wasn't that he didn't recognize me that saddened me. I'd become accustomed to that months earlier, but it was that he possessed no sense of me whatsoever. No sense that I was there, let alone who I was, just no sense at all. That day was when I realized Dad no longer possessed a sense of empathy. After 13 years, his agile mind had wound completely down. That day, our last together, there was no whiff of his goofy humor, his constant state of motion, his sometimes irritating logic, nor his complete obsession with the Kansas Jayhawks. He exhibited no self-awareness, nor signs of love or caring. After watching dementia steal his humanity, his individuality, and his personhood, my dad had finally fully disappeared from me. His frail, failing body was sitting next to me, but there wasn't a shred of light left in him. And then I got angry. Had my dad been able to see the decimated state that he was in on that day, I'm quite certain that he would have been angrier than I. It was this experience with my dad that brought into focus the necessity of my coming to terms with my own end-of-life experience. I couldn't let the same thing happen to me. In 2011, I decided to move to Portland from Kansas City. And now I could have moved anywhere in the country because my life was that way at that point. I chose Portland, though, in part because of Oregon's Death with Dignity program, but mostly because it's amazing there. My friends from Kansas City thought that was an odd criterion to decide where to live, but ultimately my move to Oregon seriously advanced my views of end of life. I saw Oregon's medical aid in dying program as a fundamental pillar of Oregon's progressive nature, and I wanted to live with neighbors who treated death with dignity and reason. Well, about 3 years ago, at age 59, I got my own dementia diagnosis. Early onset, they called it. And it's likely to become full-blown Alzheimer's, they said, which it pretty much has. Immediately, I began thinking about my end-of-life preferences. Things had to be different than my dad's experience. I knew I needed to prevent dying. I knew I needed to prevent dying like he did, without agency, without choice, without the capacity to love and feel loved. What I didn't have at that point was a way to codify what I wanted and what I did not want to tolerate as my disease progressed. The Compassion and Choices Dementia Toolkit does just that. Now I have on paper for my loved ones and my medical team to see how I want to live and what I don't want to endure in the later stages of my life with this disease. This toolkit profoundly eased an important discussion between my husband John and me. It enhanced our understanding about my end-of-life desires and made my preferences easier to talk about. Now that they're written down, I feel I have some much-needed control around my death. John and I met with my 3 adult kids and their mother, with my completed copy of the toolkit as the only agenda item. Before I lose my capacity to make decisions for myself, I can now face the practical questions that surround the rest of my life. For instance, I let my driver's license expire in August because I didn't want family members to have to force me to do so as my disease advances, when I may not be thinking straight about the risks that I present to others behind the wheel. That's just one small example of the type of considerations that the toolkit provided me. It encouraged me, it allowed me, it made me think. And that, the ability to think about the plan for my death, is a great comfort to me. Until I saw the toolkit, I was struggling. I was struggling with the when, the how, and the what of my own death. Compassion and Choices has put practical and succinct end-of-life considerations front and center with this new tool. Now I can be upfront about the intentional life I want to lead from here on. I'm also upfront about the death I want and the death I don't want. I want to outsmart my disease and deny it the ability to erase my own personhood during the last lap. We as a culture have the opportunity to start a discussion about the thorny questions surrounding dementia patients and end-of-life planning. We can now, beginning with the toolkit, potentially chart a different path with dementia-related life-death questions. Compassion and Choices is introducing the narrative by putting the full strength of their institutional knowledge and experience behind the toolkit to improve the lives and deaths of those of us with dementia. The new toolkit is ultimately a document of mercy and compassion for people like me. I now have the choices that I didn't know that I had, like the ability to live until the last day of my life with a sense of grace and choice. And because for me, on my last day, I want to feel the love. Thank you.
Okay, I want to thank our presenters here, George, Kim, Tom, and Dan. And it is time for the Q&A portion. First question, are other types of therapeutic interventions, such as music therapy, in consideration for prevention, as well as when dealing with the sleep deprivation or agitation?
Well, music therapy has demonstrated a sort of a calming and influence on those experiencing dementia, and increasingly widely used for people with moderate or late stage dementia. It is not, music therapy per se has not been regarded as a means of preventing one of the lifestyle factors that would prevent dementia. Learning a musical instrument, a new musical instrument, which creates additional synapses in the brain, is potentially a useful intervention, just like learning a second language, which will develop greater brain plasticity, greater brain resilience. But music therapy, as I understand that term, itself is not a means of prevention, more of a reason for a tool of care.
Okay, thank you. Next question, are researchers still thinking that Alzheimer's may start approximately 10 years before symptoms appear? And if so, what are the implications for medications?
Well, yeah, the answer is yes, and now they're thinking it's 15 to 20 years that the biological elements that will lead to symptomatic dementia begin in your brain. And the great challenge and race on is how is it that we're going to detect that with an easy-to-use, affordable, and accurate test. And then what do we do about that? There are two things, both prevention. Can you modify your risks in a way that, in fact, will slow down the progression of the disease or impact your brain's resilience to fight the disease? So earlier detection will potentially open up more prevention strategies in that sense of the word. It also opens up the possibility that if we can develop a drug that slows down the disease or stops it, that is the time period. That is before symptoms appear that you want to introduce that drug into people. And of course, the costs of annual screening of everybody, ideally, as we work with 4 Surgeon General now, who are articulating a desire to every year when you go in for your health exam, your normal checkup, you should get a checkup from the neck up as well as from the neck down. You should get a cognitive screen, and we need to develop with doctors the tools to do so, but a cognitive screen so that next year when you come back, are you detecting any cognitive impairment at all? Or are you as an individual experiencing subjective memory loss or subjective cognitive dissonance where you say to your doctor, something's the matter? Now the doctor can say either let's do something about that. Is it vitamin deficiency? Are you taking some meds that are interacting with each other? Is it in fact a causal element as diabetes or cardiovascular disease? All of those things the doctor can both medically manage and advise you on lifestyle changes. And if in fact none of those things seem to be the problem, then maybe you go down a longer diagnostic pathway to Alzheimer's. If I may, someone in the comment section chided me appropriately on using the word victims. I typically use the phrase a person with dementia or a person or family experiencing dementia. I apologize for using the word victim because the people with experiencing dementia are not victims. They continue to be entitled to all their both respect, honor, and love of any other person. We ought not to treat a person with dementia any differently than we treat a person with cancer or diabetes. They just happen to have this disease and not that disease. And so the phrase that I should be using, and I apologize for using the word victim, is person with dementia, or family, or person experiencing dementia.
Okay, thank you. Next question. How would you suggest broaching the subject of values regarding advanced directives with individuals or caregivers who may not have directives on their radar or who may be uncomfortable discussing end-of-life planning?
So this is a great question and one that we get all the time. I would encourage you to approach it from a place of your heart, and I'll share with you what I said to my parents when I broached it with them. I said to them, Mom and Dad, I know this is a really difficult conversation to have because there's nothing that I want more than for you to live forever. But the reality is there's going to come a point when you're at the end, and I want to be sure that I'm able to honor and respect your wishes. So could we sit down and have a conversation about what priorities are important to you so that I'm able to honor and respect you and care for you, and I don't have to guess what it is that you might want?
Thank you very much. A couple comments here for you presenters. Thank you to everyone, especially Dan, for sharing a topic that is rarely discussed and is so important. And another comment for you here. Having worked in hospice, I appreciate this seminar immensely. Awesome guest speakers. So I just wanted to throw a couple comments out there. And let's get back to the questions here. Next question here for you, everyone. What determines whether a person with dementia is still legally able to sign documents, make plans, etc.?
So in the case of something like this, it would be the doctor being able to know that the person is mentally capable, that they still have decision-making authority over their own experience. Dan, do you want to share for yourself how this has played out for you?
Yeah, how I did it was I worked with an estate attorney. I was putting my affairs in order anyway after I got my diagnosis, and I asked her to redo the advance directive, and she'd been working with me long enough that she was comfortable with my cognitive capacities at the time, and she actually wrote a statement to that effect that she was attached to my advance directive.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, next question. Do insurance companies recognize these choices as a way of coming to a natural death, and will policies be paid to beneficiaries?
Yes, historically, if someone chooses to voluntarily stop eating and drinking or to forgo other treatments, those are absolutely your rights under the law. So there is nothing that would make an insurance company not pay something if all you're doing is choosing not to extend your life. There's nothing proactive taking place. You're not taking an act to end your life. You're simply saying, I no longer want medication, I no longer want treatments, and it's your right under the law to be able to do that.
If you become ill and don't want to go to the hospital but don't have a terminal diagnosis, how do you get comfort care? If you don't go to the hospital, how do you receive any care?
That is a terrific question. So our COVID-19 toolkit is designed to help with this. What we encourage everybody to do is to have conversations with your doctor in advance to find out what treatment options might exist for you, because it's different in all areas. We've been doing a lot of work around telehealth so that people are able to get care in the comfort of their home via telehealth. And there's also been a lot of restrictions that have been waived around medications so that people are still able to get morphine prescribed in order to keep them comfortable. People are doing it in several different ways. Some people can get diagnosed or are able to get treated, and then the oxygen is sent to them. Either they go pick it up at the hospital and bring it home, so they can still remain at home but still get oxygen and then get pain medication from your primary care physician. Others are able to very quickly get onto hospice care. It's different depending on where your care setting is, and we would definitely encourage you to reach out to your doctor in advance to find out what the options are in your area.
Next question. Is the do not hospitalize document and policy honored in all states? Does it need to be validated by an attorney or a physician?
I'm actually not entirely sure if a do not hospitalize order, it's a part of a POLST typically, and those are different state by state. So if you go to the Compassion and Choices website, and you look under state actions, you'll see state-specific documents, and that will link to your state forms, and that should be able to give you the answer in your specific state.
I know that I'm in Missouri, or Oregon, and this is Dan. It does need to be validated by the physician. I was required to get my physician's signature on the document, which in Oregon's called a POLST, P-O-L-S-T.
Okay, thank you. Kim, this one's for you. How does one with dementia choose their own end with a doctor's prediction of 6 months to live? They don't always jive.
So the dementia program has nothing to do with medical aid in dying. It's an entirely different option. What we're talking about is looking for naturally occurring exit ramps that would allow a person to shorten the length of time that they live after the point they've noted. So basically you're going through the toolkit, you're answering a series of questions about what quality of life is important to you, and everybody's answer to those questions will be different. Some people may feel like they no longer have reasonable quality of life very early in the process, and other people, whoever is not speaking, if you could mute, that would be great. Some people it might be far later. So suppose you choose the point at which you are no longer able to recognize your loved ones, you can no longer recognize yourself, and you are no longer able to feed yourself. So suppose that's your point that you would want to have realize a natural death. What happens at that point is whoever you have assigned for your healthcare proxy is then going to help look for naturally occurring exit ramps. If you already have diabetes, they might work with your doctor to no longer treat your diabetes. Or if you get pneumonia, they may work with your doctor when the pneumonia comes on and just keep you comfortable but not treat your pneumonia. So you don't have to be within 6 months, but you're looking for those naturally occurring exit ramps. Once you find a naturally occurring exit ramp, you will end up being within the 6-month mark, at which point you can get onto hospice care, and then you can get all the wraparound supports that come with hospice care.
Well, unfortunately, we've reached the end of our hour here, and we are just about out of time for us to wrap up. But I want to thank our presenters here this morning, George, Kim, Tom, and Dan, for a wonderful presentation and for sharing this great information with us. Thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.